Well, hello again, and as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by technical gremlins and so forth, the Mighty Dash is on its way to Baghdad, come hell or high water, although there's not a whole lot of high water to be found around these parts. There's certainly a lot of the other thing. We are on the ground right here at Amman, Jordan's Queen Aliyah International Airport. And you really have to hand it to King Hussein, the original plucky little king. He certainly must have loved Queen Aliyah dearly because he named the capital city's airport after her, whereas the airport that's named after him, although it's in a very lovely location, is in Aqaba, which is on the Red Sea, which is decidedly a long way away. Now, the plucky little king was an aviator himself. He was a fighter pilot, and apparently he was a pretty good one. And he also liked to fly the Aliyah Airlines, which I presume was named after his queen, L-1011s, the TriStar. So he had very good taste in airplanes. We're on the tarmac, not on the tarmac, we're on the runway here because I figured I'd spare you with all the preliminaries after such a long one the last time, but suffice it to say, as we hog up the departure space here, we are going to take off here, and we're going to fly a procedure known as the LOSAR 3 Delta. And we're going to fly it on Blue Needles. It is technically capable of being flown RNAV or FMS, but we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. So what we're going to do is we are going to have Queen Aliyah QAA tuned in here on the VOR on NAV1 and NAV2 just in case, and we're going to fly outbound on that for 3.1 miles, and then we are going to intercept the 029 radial, which, as you can see, both lies off this way from the station, but also, as you can see right here on our HSI. Oh dear, I've got the audio bug. Hold on a second, let me fix that. There's a bug in this version of the Mighty Dash where if you turn off your little display things right here that come up, it only plays the outside audio. So let's just quickly, in case you've run into the same bug yourself where you shift from the outside to the inside and you still hear all the outside audio, what you do is you do this. You go to Settings, General, and just turn on something. Turn on anything here. Now, step outside. And now step inside, and it's at least slightly quieter. Let me just turn both myself and the airplane down a little bit so I can hear myself speak. Anyway, so we are going to, as you can see from the HSI here, we are west of that radial. We are going to cut into it, and when we get about 1 bar away here, we're going to commence a standard rate turn to 029, and then we will join it. And we'll fly that outbound until we get to our next waypoint, but by that point what we will have done is right about here before we get to Luxor, which I believe is on the same radial. Yeah, we can fly that radial all the way to Luxor, which unfortunately doesn't have a radio definition. In other words, I can't locate this particular fix with respect to the 029 and the intersection with Amman Marca. So sort of hosed here in terms of Blue Needle navigation, but we do know that Luxor lies on the 029 radial and is 20.8 DME, so even barring an intersection, barring tuning in this station and that station and finding out where the needles cross in essence, we can still establish ourselves on the 029, and we can fly that out 20.8 miles, at which point we know we have to be we have to stay at 9,000 or above, and we're easily going to make that, so that's not even a worry. There are no downward constraints. There are only, there are no upward constraints. There are only downward constraints. We can fly this as high and as fast as we want, and probably, given the haze that we're seeing, we should. So let's just set our altimeter, which is 2985. The wind is negligible, and as you can see, the sky conditions are sort of hazy and dusty and foggy, I guess you'd call it. So I suppose we shall proceed, and we note that 2400 elevation is about where we should be, and therefore we are correct there. And the other thing I'll do, which I neglected to do, is set our V-speeds, and we're kind of hot and high, and we're a little bit heavy. So our V-speed, V1, VR, and V2 is all 132 knots. Just spin that sucker in there. You do that, in case you're new to this, by hitting this button right here, select. You see it goes from that to that to that, and then turning said knob right here. And now, boom, it adds another one, which is for V-fry, which is flaps retraction speed. And so that's at 148, and V-climb, which is 154. All right. We will also, just for yucks, set an MDA, not for our descent, but for our climb. We're at 2400 now, and we will set that little honey to 3400, and that is 1,000 feet above field elevation. And what that will do is that will tell us when we need to, you see the cyan bar there creeping upward? That will tell us when we need to pull back our props. And nose down a little bit, that's our acceleration altitude. In fancier planes, that would be handled auto-magically through the autopilot, but not for the Mighty Dash. It's an end-top takeoff. We've got plenty of runway. Our pumps are all on. Our main bus tie is off. We don't need any anti-ice. Our heats are on. Lights are on. Taxi light is off. White anti-collision on. Logo light on. Bleeds on and min. And landing altitude, I'm not going to set till we get airborne because I need to check that with Baghdad, but I would set it for the field right here, but since if we have a really bad emergency, we're not ever going to get up to an altitude where we're very pressurized, it hardly matters. The whole point of this is so that as you descend, the airplane knows to bleed off cabin pressure so that when you land, you can actually open the doors so that there isn't so much pressure pushing out that you can both open the doors and avoid any nasty lower GI noises otherwise, because we know how painful that can be. Let me just cross-fill the FMSs, and again, to the point of somebody else who flew this plane and came afoul of this, the rule of thumb is that the FMS cross-fill on this airplane, on the Universal, well, it receives, but the mnemonic is that it sucks. So it takes whatever is here and pulls it here, or whatever here and pulls it there. If you're misfortunate enough to have plugged in a flight plan here, and then plugged in crossfill here because you want to get it over to that side, your first clue will be when it says crossfill or exfill receive, and then the blank flight plan right here will get sucked into your beautiful flight plan here, and you will be, there's a technical term for it, screwed and tattooed. So we'll take off the gust lock. Our flaps are set, trim set, rudder trim is set for about 10 notches to the right. We have tuned in on the left and the right side the VOR we're going to be using and whose radial we're going to be intercepting. And so, in heading select mode, hoping that we don't get any failures and any more jinxes on the way to Baghdad, now that we're going from one Arab country to another instead of from Tel Aviv to Baghdad, which was certainly exotic. Shall we get going? I think we shall. And Roger, Houston, and the clock is started. The squeak means the parking brake is off. We'll advance our power levers a little bit to see if they're stable, and they are. We'll advance him the rest of the way to the index point. And there we go. Power is set. Looking for 80. We'll cross-check with our first officer. We got it. She's got it too. Looking for 132 here at Hot and High Queen Aliyah. And away we go. We're taking off in toga mode, which is where we get our magenta horizontal bar. So now I'm looking for 3.1 DME. And at that point, well, we're above flap retraction speed, so let's bring them up. And we're also looking for that yellow line on the right on the speed tape there to come on up. And let's see how slowly we're climbing because of the altitude. And we're kind of heavy, got a lot of fuel. We're going over the desert. We want to be able to get wherever we need to go and then come back again if need be. Okay, back come the props. And let us cut into that radial in 1 second. Waiting for it to move. And still waiting. About another minute away. Let's get into IAS mode. We'll climb at the speed. It's not a bad speed to climb at. And we're just hand flying here, waiting for that needle to move, and then we're going to turn to 029. Another mile to go, should be. Come on, Mr. Blue Needle. Oh, we're going to turn to 029 in any case here. And as we wonder whether we've mistuned our station, I don't think we have. We will, you know what? It's looking for plus 2.1 past it, and we're not past it yet, so we'll wait on that for 1 second. And let's see if it moves. Okay, now we're going from it, which we should be. That's correct. Yeah, so we're looking for another 4 miles or so past it, and that was my mistake. Just continue to go upstairs. And before we do that, let's get rid of our auto feather, get rid of our pumps. In a second, I'll turn our bleeds to min. And in a second, we're also going to see, there we go, there's the needle. And we'll just, of course, we will have blown through that radial because I was looking at something else. So we'll go get it there, spin our heading bug around to a logical intercept there. We'll follow the flight director, it knows what it's doing. And we're going to take this for 20 some odd miles outbound, but let me just get established on the radial first. This is me not reading charts. And let's put us in nav mode, and let's come back and we'll grab that radial. There we go. In we come. Cut in on a little bit more. There is a formula for this, and I don't know it. It's like half a needle width away, half the number of degrees, or something like that. And I will learn it. I swear I will. At the moment, I'm reliant on just sort of eyeballing how quickly the CDI is moving in or out, and that's probably a poor way to do it. It's certainly not precise. We've got the flight director needles to help us as well. But at any rate, let's just quickly check our chart now that we're getting ourselves nicely established here on the 029. We're getting there. We take that 20.8 miles. Okay, we can do that. Or to DME 20.8 is what we do. So we're 12 miles, 13 miles away. So we can fly that by hand. And we are going to be up to 13,000, and I believe after Losar we can climb to our cruising altitude, which is going to be 250. And you can see there's really not a lot of scenery down here. It's basically desert desolation and people who are really pissed off at lots of other people, including yours truly, but not leaving out just about everybody else. And then there's a whole lot of people who are stuck in the middle of it, who honestly probably just wish all this crap would go away and they could just live normal lives. So it is such a shame about that. Alright, so we're 12 and we're looking for 20.8. And we're going to put in our autopilot here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to switch over and let's see how close we are to our, look at that. We are, boom, lateral deviation on the GPS version of this is precisely 0. So by flying the Blue Needles, we did this absolutely right to the numbers after we remembered about the changeover. So let's switch into Pink Needles, and because we were so close to it, we didn't even need to switch into heading mode first for fear that it would jerk us around the sky. And let's also set our cruising altitude to 250, and let's also set our altimeter to standard because we're above the transition height in this area. Altcel, standard baro. Try that again. All right. And while we're at it, let's get back in IAS mode. I don't know why it switched us to pitch mode, but there you go. And we'll continue to climb, and we will extinguish our lights and turn our bleeds to normal so that we don't suffocate like Prince Albert in a can. If you're old enough to remember. If you're not, ask your great-grandparents. It's a brand of tobacco, and the phone prank used to be to call a tobacconist and ask them if they had Prince Albert in a can. And when they replied yes, the answer was supposed to be, well, you better let him out before he suffocates. It was sort of like calling Kentucky Fried Chicken and asking how big their breasts are and that sort of thing. Very classy, you know. Kid stuff. Fun in the right dose and at the right time. Nothing like a good prank call. But we would never do that from the Mighty Dash. And we're getting icing. How do you like that? So, on comes the ice protection. On comes the prop heat. Open come the engine intake doors, which are actually, more accurately, engine extake doors. They are doors, let me show you, that open up. Well, will you look at that? My gear lever was late to the party. Oh man, some days. No wonder we weren't climbing the way I thought we should. That's what checklists are for. I thought I hit the key. My mind and my memory tells me I did hit the key. I obviously didn't hit the key. And a good sanity check would have been to look at our climb speed, because it's not as good as it should be, and the very fact that it is so incredibly high even now, or even when the gear was down, is a testimonial to the power of the mighty dash, but it's certainly a testament to the stupidity of her captain. But let me just show you the what happens is an engine intake will build up full of ice, and then the heater will heat it, and the chunks of ice run the risk of getting sucked into the engine and causing mayhem. So what happens is when that happens, some airplanes call them, well, I'll tell you in a minute, but there's a door that opens up, and I'm not sure exactly where it's located on the dash, but it's somewhere around here, so that the ice that gets shaken off of here, instead of getting sucked into the works here, falls out right here because it's heavier, and it's heavier than the airflow going in. The airflow is moving that way, and the airflow blows the ice across the door, and boom, the ice falls out and the air keeps going. On some other turboprops, instead of being called engine intake doors, it's called an inertial separator, but it basically does exactly the same thing. It uses the inertia of heavy objects to go where they want to go, which is down, versus that of the air, and it goes where it wants to go, and which is into the engine. So not only are we hitting a little icing, we're hitting some turbulence too. So that's fun. So let's do this. Let's turn on our weather radar. I didn't think we would need it. And shame on me, I should have at least had it on standby for the departure, but we'll turn on our radar and we'll put it in the first officer side so we can get a little peek here. I'm still rebinding my keys here now that I've reinstalled everything, so we will switch the switch here from sys to nav, and so now there's the nav, or in this case the radar. You flip-flop it with this, that's terrain, and you'll see it says terror on, that's terrain, or you hit it again and now you see radar or weather standby, which should actually be in on. It is on, but sometimes you have to give it a little nudge before it comes on. Okay, weather on, and it's sweeping, and what we'll do is, since I don't think there's anything to speak of above us, let's just sweep what's slightly below us. So what we do for that is we tilt it down ever so gently, about 5 degrees, and see what there is to see on the radar range. And obviously if you tilt it down too far, what you end up seeing is terrain, which we're not seeing, thank goodness, because if and when you do, you're certainly in a bad way. Anyway, we're about 4,500 away from our cruising altitude, at which point we'll pull our props back to max cruise, and let's just take a perfunctory check on our cabin elevation, which is at about 5,000, which is fine. It's climbing slightly, but not precipitously, nor is it dropping precipitously, which is fine. And it's within the correct differential between the inside and the outside, which is also fine. So everything is doing its job. So let's turn off the fasten seatbelt sign. And I think everything else is copacetic. Let's also, well, let's listen to the flight attendant. Alright, so we won't smoke. But what we will do is we will look at a spot where we can see if there's any icing without looking at the wings, and that is the little dingus here that sticks out from the windshield wiper. I guess it's a strut. And the reason we look at that is because it is one of the earliest things to pick up ice, and it's also something that isn't hit by any of the anti-ice. So the best indicator of whether you're in icing conditions or not, other than temperature and differential and a weather forecast, would be to look here and see if you're picking it up. In a GA aircraft, you wouldn't even go into certain icing conditions. In an aircraft like this, there's good ice protection, and you would certainly not seek it out, but at least you wouldn't worry about coming upon it because you've got these big boots right here. As a matter of fact, let's zip outside here, and I think, yeah, every once in a while even when the boots have done their work, you'll still see some ice on the spinner here because that's not heated. But in any case, no more ice. We can turn them off, save the life of the boots. Some airlines' SOP is to keep these doors open all the time, others at certain altitude, others not at all except in icing. So we'll just keep it off for the moment. And we will see that we're now 50 miles away from Queen Aliyah, and we know how painful that can be. And I mean no irreverence whatsoever. The Queen of Jordan for many years was actually the daughter of Najib Halabi, who was for many years the head honcho at Pan American Airlines. So there is that. I believe Aliyah was the first wife, but I am not. I do not have my Hashemite history probably right, and I've long since forgotten a lot of it, and shame on me, because the battles that have been fought over succession and territory and colonialism and ex-colonialism and occupation and all the rest of that are certainly the stuff of a lot of contemporary history, and apologies in advance for my ignorance. All I know is that between King Hussein and Queen, I believe she became known as Queen Noor, Lisa Halabi, or probably Americanized here, Halabi. Okay, so we're 1,000 away from our cruise. Between the two of them, they have a heck of a lot of aviation in their background. Her father and he himself. So, you know, we're flying over a bit of aviation as well as a bit of world history. And at the moment, actually, we're flying over a bit of northern Syria and western Iraq. So we're keeping our eye peeled for anything strange in the air. And we have, of course, plotted out this flight plan in advance and notified all the authorities, such as they are in the area. And we also are aware that because of, here, let me zoom out here, because of where we are, let me just see, I've got this switched over to show available airports nearby within 80 or 160 nautical miles, and as you can see, the technical term for our alternatives are slim and none and diddly. So we're kind of on our own here. Fortunately, there's not a lot of terrain other than desert, and every once in a while there's a road. But that really is about it, and probably the aircraft that operate across territory like this are more on the order of 737s, Airbuses, and things like that, which have not only a longer range, but at the altitudes they cruise at, vitally have got a longer gliding distance. Where they're cruising, they can probably glide down from 120 miles out, whereas we can probably glide down from about half that. So this is, you know, kind of novel, and I will say it's not especially interesting. So what we'll do is let's quickly program in a VNAV descent, and then what we'll do is we will cut the video and pick it up at TOD. So to do a VNAV descent, we find the salient minimum we want to hit, which is SEBI, and actually let's make this at 3650. Let's see if it takes it at 3650. Okay. And we'll choose that. This is really our intermediate fix on the way to the approach. This is our IAF right here, I believe. And so we'll hit VNAV. We'll choose the first SEBI at 10. Let's see if it gives us a number. Gives us 3650, which we already set. And so we'll say yes, that's where we want to be. We want to go down at that speed. That's reasonable. And we are 47 minutes away from TOD, and there's no way on earth you want to hear me talk that long, and there's no way on earth I can't talk that long. So what we're going to do is, as we glide majestically, no pun intended, above the deserts of western Iraq, we will leave it there and pick it up shortly when we're a little bit closer to our exciting destination. So see you in a few. And hello again, and as you can see, the mighty dash is still the same, and the terrain has hardly changed either. We are about 10 minutes from our top of descent into Baghdad International, and being the good video editor I used to be, I'm going to wait till we go out of frame and then boom, cut to an interior shot, and we can just brief our arrival. Actually, we are going to be flying this arrival into Baghdad here, which is for runway 33 right, the ILS, and with SEBI as our transition, which is right here. We are not going to fly the whole, because goodness knows I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time circling idly over Baghdad, so instead we will expedite our descent so that we hit Gebze, or Gebza, not sure which, by 2,100 feet. We'll come in at 3,600 feet. So we've got 6 miles to come down that far, and we can do that, certainly. Thank you to the viewer who let me know that, hey dummy, the airfield elevation on Lido charts is right down here in the lower left. And we've got the ILS frequency tuned up, and we also have the Baghdad VOR tuned up, because in case of a missed approach we'll fly a radial off of that, and then we'll fly to Putsi. So, a German term of endearment. So, anyway, you'll excuse my chewing at certain moments. I don't eat a lot of sweet things, and it's been profoundly beneficial for me not to. At the same time, I have an insatiable weakness for cherries. I came across some dried Michigan sour cherries. They call them tart cherries, but they used to call them sour cherries because that's what they are. And they're the kind of cherries, not that you put in a bowl fresh, but they're the kind of things that you dump 3 cups of sugar into, then stuff into a pie crust, and you make a cherry pie that still is tart. If you eat these little honeys fresh, they'll practically pucker your face shut, and I happen to like that, and they happen to make the dried version of them. And within the realms of my lunatic diet, I can still consume about a handful of them and and still be on the side of the good. So I am, because this is basically, and there's no sugar added to these, but they do have sugar in them. And just to digress for a minute on things diet, whenever people say, well, they don't add any sugar to it, and they're eating something like citrus fruit, or they're eating a banana, or they're mainlining maple syrup or whatever, well, they don't have to add any sugar to it. There's plenty of it in there already. Anyway, They don't add any sugar to this, and they advertise it that way, and that's supposed to make it virtuous, but the fact is it's dried fruit, and fruit has sugar in it, pretty decent amount of sugar in it, even tart fruit. And when you dry it, of course, you can eat in one handful the equivalent of about 40 or 50 cherries, and think about that, what that would mean if you ate 40 or 50 fresh cherries. So, you know, it is not entirely without its drawbacks, but on the other hand, every once in a while, to take a tiny little product of nature, pop it in your mouth, and have an entire cherry pie explode upside your head is hardly the worst thing in the world. And there has to be something to be said for things that improve your spirits, and God knows that does. So let's square up our heading bug. You can see we're getting a nice little shove from our right hindquarters here. I've set our V-speeds, and actually let's set our first constraint, which is 3600 at SEBI. So we'll put that in there. And since we're going to be intercepting the glide slope at that point, I'm actually, unlike in a normal descent that has many waypoints to hit, especially around mountainous terrain where you often have an arrival that's flown, say, with a VNAV that has, you know, a waypoint that's 50 miles out with a minimum, and one that's 42, and one that's 37, and on and on and on down as you sort of follow the vertical path. This basically only has one, and it just has to get us from here to just past Silbo, which is the beginning of the approach. There are no stars into Baghdad International. I don't know why. Probably because you get vectors all the way, and I don't know whether that's a quirk of local ATC or whether that's a legacy of the troubles there, whether that's the way U.S. military controllers used to do it, and so they do it there to this day. I'm lacking in knowledge, and anybody who knows anything about air operations in and out of Baghdad, I'd love to know. I have colleagues in my business who used to fly in and out of there regularly back when things were really rough, and at that point it was the U.S. military or the Iraqi military handling things, and you basically did kind of combat arrivals where you'd stay as high as possible to avoid ground fire, and then you come circling down in a mighty couple 360s, plummeting out of the sky. A really kind of fun approach, which we ought to try sometime. And of course landing as expeditiously as possible, so there wasn't a lot of lingering around in the skies, at least certainly not lingering around in the skies at the sort of altitudes that a shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missile could hit, or that rifle fire could hit. So, not sure how they do things now, but you know, they haven't had a whole lot of trouble in that regard lately, and I'm not about to pretend I know what's going on there. Only that when it was bad, good friends of mine who knew I was into aviation said, you know, you might want to make the visit and just try it. And I, of course, demurred politely because heavens to Murgatroyd, I don't. Anyway, thanks to the viewer who gave me the tip on finding field elevation, which is right here, and so we'll add 500 feet to that and spin that in, and we'll actually find we're just about there. That's about right. Pressurization is still fine. Everything's good. We've seated the passengers. We've briefed our approach. Our minimum is 200 feet, and because of the haze, we might just get it. Our altimeter locally is 2985, same as in Amman, but Amman is at 2,400 feet, and of course Baghdad is near sea level, certainly near river level. If there's anything that is famous in Iraq, it is, of course, the Tigris and the Euphrates and the cradle of civilization and all of that stuff. And the hanging gardens of Sulaymaniyah, some of the wonders of the world, some of the atrocities of the world. But with any luck, things will get sorted out there. Probably not to everyone's liking, but nothing is. I just hope that there's a lot more listening and a whole lot less shooting, so we'll see what happens. In the meantime, we're really concerned with aviation here. That and sour cherries. Holy mackerel. These are good. I have to try and stop myself from using, shall we say, technical terms to describe just how good they are. And there's no real brand to promote. I'm not plugging anything. I mean, just go to Amazon or something and look up tart cherries. And I'm not sure it matters who or what. It's not like Procter & Gamble makes them or anything, or Nestle's. All right, so our VNAV is showing up. We can select VNAV mode for the descent, make sure that it enunciates, make sure that our altitude is set. Invoke the mighty alt cell because we want to put a floor on the bottom of that. Because the worst comes to worst, we get lost. We can shuffle around town at that altitude and vector ourselves onto the ILS. I don't know about the propensity in the Middle East for doing visual approaches. I know that in a lot of Europe and outside the U.S. there aren't a ton of them. And in the U.S., especially at certain busy airports, air traffic control likes those sorts of things because if you do them right, you can expedite traffic flow. So they'll vector you to some point, and instead of insisting that you fly the full procedure, they'll in essence say, see that aircraft ahead of you? That aircraft is on a downwind leg, follow it. And maintain visual separation, and contact tower, and good day to you, sir. And they do. So we're coming up on this big lake here, and I forgot to research what lake it is, so let's find out, because it looks certainly significant, and I should know better. So before we hit TOD, let's hit maps.google.com. Alright, we're still far enough away that we're not going to endanger lives by distracting ourselves here. But I wanted to be able to tell you, oh, that's that lake, because I don't want to be an ignoramus. Anyway, the airport famously is to the west of town, and famously at one point this was the most dangerous highway on Earth. And this is gee, boy, it's a simple one too. Habbaniyah Lake. And there's Fallujah. And that is the mighty Euphrates. And there is the Tigris. And, I'm sorry, there is the Tigris, and there is Baghdad. This is Habbaniyah, and this could be Thertar Lake. Not sure. I'm not sure of the Arabic pronunciation. And I love this. This is the Haditha Dam Lake, or the Dam Haditha Lake. I'm not sure which. All right, down we go. Roll off some power. We'll have to retrim in a second. I bet you that's Habbaniyah because that's the other one, and then there's an other one way off to the north. So this is the southernmost of the lakes, and it is the only geographical feature that we've seen so far in this flight. I'm sure in the real desert it is at least slightly more filled with local character, but at the moment there ain't nothing. Alright, so we're just riding the barber pole here down. I've got my throttle quadrants a little bit better calibrated, so I'm not always going into beta accidentally. But if you hear a little bit of whistles, it's because I'm not yet used to it physically. I don't have it committed to the sort of right brain, but we are just down there at absolute minimum here. Let's take out our right rudder trim here, and we just rotate the trim knob until that centers up. I got that fixed too. All right. And again, we are riding this sucker all the way down to 3600. Let's just see if we can arm the approach. I'm already picking up Baghdad VOR. Let's see if we're picking up the localizer too. And actually, while we're at it, let's check our inbound course, which I believe is 286. Losing my mind, it's 326. Only off by 40 degrees, not bad. Alright, so what we'll do is we'll hop on over to the left side. We will flop our radio over briefly and flop the captain's side too. We will tune into 326 for the inbound course, and we'll do that thusly, keeping an eye on the speed on the first officer's side, seeing how the other half lives. Alright, 326 there. And now that we've done that, what we will do is we will pop this back into Baghdad so we can have that at a glance in case we need it for the missed approach, and in case we forget in the heat of excitement to flip-flop the Nav1. And then what we'll do is, for the Nav1, we will hold down our format key, which puts up a preview of our localizer, and we will punch in 326 for that too. So in we go. And as you can see, we'll be approaching from the southwest, pardon me. Alright, I can't do math and I don't know geography. But other than that, we're just doing mighty fine. I believe that is Baghdad over there, but let's cheat a little. And we can bring our power up a bit and expedite our arrival here. That's about right. These power levers in the new Precision Flight PFC quadrant are much more precise. Mechanically, though, the detents that keep them from going into reverse and feather are much too stiff, and so I'm going to try a mechanical fix on that shortly. Namely, I'm going to take a little grinder to it and grind the ramp down on it so it's not quite so precipitous. The folks at PFC were very, very nice about getting this to me, selling it to me, getting it to me quickly, shipping it out, and all the rest. The technical support was less helpful, though, when it came to doing anything about the fact that it requires me to use two hands to actually jam it through those detents, holding the console with one hand and shoving the levers with another. So leaving that aside, we'll just fix that ourselves. With a little Dremel tool, a little burr grinder there, and just take a little edge off of the notch that the lever has to go over. I'm sure in the real, I know in the real plane, not from flying it, but from at least manhandling the levers, they're much fancier pieces of mechanical equipment, and they certainly don't require both hands to go from beta into reverse, but we'll get that sorted out. No big deal. And let's hold down format again and go back to our flight plan so we can see where we are. And, well, that is Baghdad right off there, so I'm not doing too bad. So we're looking for 10, and we're going to slow down and put on our pumps, put on our lights, and switch to local altimeter. And let us see. We could program in our HUD, except we are not going to be flying. There is no Cat 3 legal approach or Cat 2 legal approach in here, so it's not really worth it. We'll keep an eye out now for icing, because we are kind of right in a good place for it. And we'll roll off some power because the air is getting thicker. We're just cooking on in. See if we can arm the approach, but before we do that, let me just get us slowed down about 5 knots or so. we are hauling the proverbial technical term is what we are doing. Let me just check our frame rates. I've got it locked at 30, and that's pretty good. We're pumping 4K here, as you know, and this is a prepared version 3.2. It's on an X99 5820 chip with an affinity mask set to use no processors at all on the first core, and then every other processor on the remaining 5, so that there isn't a lot of contention for processors, but there's still enough processing to push textures and feed the GPU as fast as we can. I've also got an affinity mask. I almost called it an infinity mask, but or maybe an insanity mask of 0.08 or 9, or maybe 0.1, but right in that area. And that is to balance off stuttering versus blurries versus textures not loading in time, and that's always a trade-off. We've got Active Sky next, but as you can see, Rex Soft Clouds is not quite ready, so these are the stock clouds, and they're not too bad. Alright, again, looking for 10. And looking reasonably good. Let me just check our weather here, see if it's changed. 2983, okay. Pop that in there. And I know I'm jinxing myself, but I trust we're not going to have the avionics problem we had in the last flight, which was a very novel failure. It was kind of cool. And let's see if we can arm the approach. Nav mode, arm approach. Now, it doesn't offer tune approach because we have tuned it ourselves. If our ArcDo had been mistuned, then it would offer to tune it, and we would say yes. We're not going to activate it because it will either start the approach, or it will try to give us vectors to the approach, or given the angle we're coming in, it will conclude that we don't have a vector to the approach, and then it sort of throws up its hands and shrugs its shoulders and tells us essentially in a technical phrase, you're on your own, kid. There might be some secret mojo to it, but I have not discovered it yet. There are things that you can do that are beyond the scope of this FMS and autopilot, and it will basically just mostly it'll default to a safe mode, like it'll keep you in your present pitch or your present heading or keep your wings level, but you know, it'll basically also just tell you in the voice of Hal the computer, I'm sorry Dave, I can't do that. Now, it'll never refuse to open the pod bay door, and it will never suffocate you, but, you know, anyway, so we're below the transition altitude. We'll drop 2983 in there, and that will result in us being below our path, and it will shallow our descent, it will roll off some speed, we will roll off some speed also. And we're going to keep our eyes and ears open because I was telling another viewer, I think I mentioned this in the last video, he said, love the plane, love to fly it. Say, what do you do about an auto throttle in this? I've been unable to determine whether it has one. And of course the answer is, what's the technical term for it? Fuck no. There is no auto throttle in this plane, which is good and bad. The bad, of course, is that you can level off and forget to increase the power, or you can start going down and forget to reduce the power and get into trouble. The good is it keeps you, of course, on your toes, which is good. And the other good is that I've found in at least the simulated versions of the airplanes, like a 777, if you've got a speed set in auto throttle, but then you make too many pitch changes in your arrival, say, you're constantly making the auto throttle hunt back and forth, and it's rolling on power, and it's rolling off power, and you always feel like you're a little bit behind the curve. Which really what it means is that obviously experienced pilots should fly those planes, not us. But the other thing is that I suspect, and I'll ask my 777 flying buddy, I suspect this is also why some airlines, notably Southwest, I don't know if they still do this, but they mandate that when the autopilot is off, the auto throttle has to be off too, so that you, in essence, aren't sort of fighting the airplane, I guess. I know with the 777 that's changed quite a bit, and there are quite a few airlines, I think British Airways included, that say auto throttle on all the time, whether you're hand flying it or not. So I guess it all depends. Anyway, we're monitoring our arrival. We are 10.5 from Sebi, and we need to come down another 3,000 feet, and that is right smack on the money. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in a second, put us into heading select mode and switch over to blue needles. But first, there's our localizer. I'm going to let it turn us at Sebi, and we'll watch it do the intercept. And then we will, as soon as it gets itself established, do the flip, fly the airplane, and try not to make a sow's ear out of it. And we will switch our MDA now to 11,114, which is going to be our acceleration altitude when we climb out of there, if we have to do a missed approach. And we'll be busy if we do. Basically, it's a right turn out on Baghdad, which I'm going to be monitoring in both this here, and let me just switch the green needle to VOR2 is right here. And as we get closer to Sebi, let's slow down. It's quite an acute little turn here. And actually, before we do that, let's just get configured. Okay. Mixture's full. Lights on. Boom. Bleeds. Min. And done. Alright. So we're turning to intercept the localizer. It's going to level us off in a second. We're going to bleed off some speed. We're going to come down below 200, drop our first notch of flaps, and we will see, as they say, how we get on. Letting the speed come down at about 11% torque. Spin our heading around. We are descending nicely for 3,600. And in comes our localizer, and we're still a ways out. We're still 13 miles out, so that's good. Okay, notch of flaps number 1. Next thing will be the gear. And as soon as it finishes our turn, I'm not going to do a thing till it does. I will switch us over into nav 1. Just holding our speed here. Okay, we've captured our altitude. And now it's already set up for an LNAV approach, so it's doing an overlay approach, but what we're going to do is we are going to flip our nav source over to nav 1 and plop ourselves into approach, and we are above the glide slope, so what we are going to have to do is come down ourselves. So we will. Okay, off comes the power, in comes the gear. This is why they have the hold there, by the way. And you really shouldn't intercept a glide slope from above, but we're actually far enough out that it's really not much of a risk. So I'm going to fly the localizer, put out one more notch of flaps, slow ourselves down a little more.
2,500.
And this is sportier than I would have liked, but we'll just get ourselves on the localizer there. Just a little bit right. There's the outer marker, and there is the glide slope. And again, we are breaking the law here. But not by much. Final notch of flaps. There's our little miscalibration. runway in sight. Pop us into standby mode, and let's slow down to our VAP. So we're going to come down below the glide path a little bit. We've got a little bit of a right to left crosswind. There we go. Okay, now we're on the glide path, so we're going to pull up our snout, and we're going to crab a little bit, and we're going to trickle in the slightest bit of power and retrim. Okay, you see the nose coming up there? That is the speed coming off. Okay, that's it. So now up comes the nose to our landing attitude. In comes the power. There we go. We're right tickling above our VAP, and we've got a little healthy crab going on here. So I'm trying to maintain the center line with my feet. Not making any sudden moves. The wind is dying a little bit there, so I'm going to come back.
Minimums.
We're landing. We're right above VAP. We're perfect on that.
100.
And the wind comes back, which it just did. Feed in a little more crab.
50, 40,
At 10.
20, 10.
I'm going to gently remove the crab like that. And there we are. And then I'm going to struggle to maintain center line. All right, welcome to Baghdad. No runs, no hits, no errors. Sounds so ominous, our final destination. All right, I think that's about all the yammering I can do. I think we're going from here to possibly Kuwait City, possibly Dubai, depending on the legs on this little baby. But in the meantime, hope you got something out of this, and thanks for watching. And as we taxi up to the gate here, we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.